right, welcome back to the Paradigm Project. We are happy to be back. Today we have a wonderful guest, Mayor Ramsey, Mayor of South Jordan. So, Daniel, would you like to start us off?
Sure. How are you doing?
I'm so good. Thank you. Last night I was sworn in and took the oath of office for my second term as mayor of South Jordan. So I have finished my first 4-year term and have the good fortune and the great blessing of being reelected and get the chance to do this again for 4 more years. And I'm grateful for that. So I'm good.
Awesome.
I'm busy.
That is so great.
Very busy, but so good.
How are you involved in education?
Well, that seems like kind of a two-sided question. I'm going to give you a two-sided answer to that question, if I can. So who am I with education? What does education mean to me? Or what's my experience with education versus what's my role as mayor in education, if that's okay? So education is what I love. I have 6 children and spent all of their growing up years in their schools. Lots of different schools. You know, we haven't even moved the whole time we've lived in South Jordan, and I think we've gone to like 8 or 9 or 10 different schools, lots of schools between the different ages and the different needs of my kids. They haven't all gone to their neighborhood school. We've tried to send them to the schools that meet their needs, you know, and are a better fit for them. That's much more important to me than what's convenient. But I always helped in their schools. And I served as, you're all familiar with PTAs and PTOs, and I was a PTA president, I think about a dozen times.
Nice, yeah.
I served as region PTA director for Jordan School District over at the time. There were 57 schools in Jordan School District. And so I served as region PTA director for them and on the Utah PTA State Board of Directors. I love education. I like to get involved in as many schools as possible, try to be as present and supportive and attend any and everything that I am possibly invited to or know about at our charter schools here in the city as well, all of our schools, because I love it, because I think education is so important to me. I currently serve as president of the Jordan Education Foundation. Nice. We're not part of Jordan School District, but we're kind of an arm that raises money to help support educational needs in classrooms. You know, I think there's just never going to be enough money for education, no matter what the model is. Education always needs more resources, right? And so just doing what we can to try to help raise additional resources from private funds and donors to help support education. And none of that has anything to do with my being mayor. That's just who I am and what I've always done. So that's what I'm a part of. So I have served on the foundation board for, this is my 9th year. And so when I was elected mayor, I said, well, this gives me a chance to even do more, hopefully, with education and get to know even more of our schools and our students and our educators and the parents at the schools. But what I do with education doesn't really have anything to do officially with my capacity as mayor, as far as those things that I just shared. Now, what do I do as mayor with education? Why does that matter? Maybe how can I be supportive of education as mayor? Mm-hmm. So we don't have any specific say over curriculum. You know, we're not in charge of curriculum. We're not in charge of schools or what happens in schools at all at the municipal level. You know, we help provide crossing guards and we provide safety, you know, safety needs and things like that, our public service, of course. But we don't have any specific jurisdiction over education. That said, I think because this is the thing I love the most and what really matters to me the most, it gives me a chance to take my role as mayor to be present in our schools. And I appreciate so much invitations like this to come and get to be part of it and to meet with you and to see what you're doing at the school and the great things that are happening. I love attending graduations. I love going to speak to students. Anything that I'm invited to, I try to move heaven and earth to get there. So
that's awesome. We appreciate you being here for us.
For sure. Definitely.
Well, it's a privilege for me. It really is a privilege for me. And partly, I think, these days when people think of government, most people think of the federal government. And most people think government's a hot mess. And, you know, it's just this faceless bureaucracy of not getting anything done and you can't trust anyone. And there's such a narrative out there that that's the case. And I want people to see that is not what we have here. And back when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House, and other people have said it too, but I know he said all government is local.
Right.
And these days, I think a lot of people think all government is federal. And if I can have the opportunity to come in and visit with students like you who are forming your opinions about government and learning about what the Constitution means and how our democratic republic is set up, if I can come in and be a face to maybe help people understand, oh, you know what, they're actually regular people who are good people, who are nice, who do care about what's happening, and they really do just want to serve. And we can trust them and we can call them and we know them and consider them our friends. It takes that distaste for government hopefully away a little bit and maybe endears young people to, oh, it's maybe not everything I see on the news or hear or read on social media. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a goal that I have too.
That's awesome.
That's beautiful.
So,
Yeah, Democracy in America talks about how local government being involved in education is really important, and it increases our ability to be able to learn better and stuff like that. So we're really glad that that's your priority.
thank you.
One thing that I noticed that you said that I absolutely love is that your kids' school's experience was very different. There were a lot of different types of school, and that's something that you think is really important. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you think that's important? A lot of people see just, public school, and then there's a couple weird schools or whatever, but so many different people have different needs. And how can you help that in this city?
I'm happy to speak to that. I really feel strong that parents need to do what is best for their individual child. And like I said, I have 6 kids and they're all similar, but they're different, and we're all different. Everyone learns differently, right? And there is a traditional model that exists that I think trying to reach center mass to educate everyone possible, which is what generally public district schools, it's a similar model, right? They all follow a similar model. That doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Nothing is ever going to be just right for everyone in any arena, no matter what the subject is, right? And so I really think that being able to have opportunities to figure out what works best for each individual child, individual student, I think that's really important. As a mom, for me it is, but I think it is for all parents. I think people need to be able to choose. Just last night, I read a proclamation, which I read every year, and it's not a super formal thing, but it officially declares, I think it's the 23rd through the 29th of January, as School Choice Week, officially in South Jordan, recognizing the variety of schools that we have, and that we have good schools meeting the needs of students in so many different ways, and the importance that plays, and declaring School Choice Week.
That is so beautiful. And I know that I have so many friends who go to public schools and who thrive there. But me, because of the way that I learn, having the opportunity to go to Paradigm and have this structure and have the discussions and the intimate mentor-scholar discussions and that kind of help is just absolutely beautiful and what I need for my education. Whereas my friends might thrive better in homeschool or in private school or whatever that be.
Right. Well, it's the reason people choose even different kinds of universities for the same reason, right? They have different emphasis. Some are private. And there are so many. People think maybe of university and they think that a blanket college degree.
Right, for sure.
They're so different.
No.
And people have choices, and they make choices based on what is available and what meets their needs best.
Right.
And I don't think that should only start at college. I think people should have the opportunity to figure out what works best for their individual child, for their family circumstance. And I think public district schools do a really good job of trying to hit center mass and educate, with this big model that works for a lot of people, knowing it doesn't work for everyone, or it might work for a period of time and then needs change. And then then it doesn't. There's never going to be one size fits all. And I don't think there ever should be, especially not in education.
Right.
Right. So Tocqueville stated that one of the reasons for the education vigor and the success of the early Americans was kind of the various communities within the local level and their dedication to education and starting institutions. So how do you feel about this statement? Do you think that's really the way to do it?
I think it absolutely was. I'm grateful that we started out that way with a commitment to education. I think now that we've grown to where we're at, there are still opportunities to start new things. And if there's a need not being met or a niche that hasn't been filled, to create a way to fill it, And as I said, sometimes needs change, and we live in a world at the precipice of big change. I think a lot of things right now are changing, and technology has exploded, and the pandemic has made it so now everything can be done virtual. I mean, your school is virtual today, which it didn't intend to be, but it is. But that's happening everywhere. It's happening in the workplace, and it's just a different model than we've ever had. So I think there is still absolutely opportunity to create new as we grow and evolve as a society, and as new things come up. The careers that your children will probably have likely don't even exist yet, right? As things are just changing. So I do think that there's opportunity to continue to, at the local level, go, this is important to us, and it doesn't exist yet, or we could create this, grow this, build on this. I think that still exists, not the same as it did when we were so brand new as a country, as a nation, and trying to start out. But I'm really grateful that education was valued the way it really was by our founding fathers. I love Thomas Jefferson. I think he's so brilliant.
Right.
Amen.
One of my favorite things to visit, if you've ever been, have you been to the Library of Congress and had the chance to go see his library,
I have.
his
I want
collection? Sometime in your lifetime, do that. go to the Library of Congress and see Thomas Jefferson's personal library. I mean, it is inspiring, and my jaw just hits the floor. I'm like, it's amazing.
Awesome.
But I'm grateful, though, that we had him and people like him and other women, Abigail Adams, and people who really helped make sure that got with an educational start. But I don't think those days are over. I think we still have opportunities to do that.
Do you think that there's still like a vigor and like that kind of mindset in our communities here?
I think not as much.
Right.
I think as a society overall, maybe not as much, because we have conveniences and comforts that they couldn't imagine back then. And they also were starting with a blank slate. We have the benefit of a couple hundred years worth of efforts from people who have gone before us to help create what we now enjoy, right? And so do I think the vigor is the same? No, because so much already exists that it's just part of regular everyday life. All this plethora of opportunities that are available to us, especially with education, because we have so many choices. I think it's something that unconsciously can be taken for granted just because we have it and it's there. So I don't think the vigor is the same as it was. And that's not to mean that we don't still have a lot of passion for education, but I think it's different, if you will, than those who were desperate to start something. Right.
Do you think it was better or more effective then? And of course, there might be pros and cons to now versus then. But
yeah, I think that's kind of depends on which side of the coin you're looking at, right? Because I think we do have the advantage of a couple of hundred years of fine tuning. Right. Do I think education quality is better than it was 50 years ago? Yes. I think we've learned a lot, and I think we've certainly learned a lot more that students do learn differently, what that looks like and how to meet different needs. Now there are far more choices than there used to be. So I think we've come a long way.
What do you see as the educational needs of the South Jordan community?
I think the most important educational need is to have a well-educated citizenry. I think our young people need to be well-educated. I think we live in a time where things are divided. I think we see a lot of things that happen in silos right now, especially politically, but there's a lot of decisions that spill into life and social issues and all sorts of things that really are debated in silos. And I think we need a really well-educated citizenry here in South Jordan and beyond South Jordan, across the state and across the country, to be able to understand how to think, how to vet ideas, how to disagree respectfully, how to consider other people's ideas. I mean, there's such a need for that, but I think so much of that comes back to being well educated. So I think that's the greatest need for education in our city, and why.
That's awesome.
That is beautiful. So, and that kind of links into a couple of our other questions of what the role in education is. Could you go a little bit further into that? Because yes, it kind of helps to unify us, but what else does it do?
I think it was Gandhi that said, if we ever want to achieve real peace, we need to start by educating our children. And I agree with that. I think the more we understand about the world around us, about those who have gone before us, those who we share this community with and this planet with, I think if we better understand that, society is going to work better. I think it's a lack of understanding creates so many unnecessary problems. And so I think when I bring that here home close to South Jordan, what does it do? What does it do if we understand each other? It really helps us come together and create better policy. I think it allows us to listen to other people at the table and to be open to bringing people who disagree with us to the table and sharing conversation. I think that really helps form the best policies. I really believe we need good representation at the table on all sides. We can't just have one or another demographic, if you will, making policies. It's really important that we have people at the table and with differing views and that people understand how to communicate with each other. And I think that's how the best policy is created. And education is key in making that happen.
People sometimes argue that it's specifically government's responsibility to ensure that everybody is getting the proper education. What are your thoughts on that? Are you thinking it's a bigger government, a smaller level of government? Is it the individual's responsibility?
That's a really good question. And it's a tricky question. I don't think there's one simple answer for that. So I'll tell you what I think. There's a lot of debate over whether education is a right or a privilege, right? And it's not, education is not listed in the Constitution specifically as a right. However, if that's the only way we're looking at it as a right, it's not listed as a right. But do I think that it's a privilege that everyone should have? And that it shouldn't be a privilege for some and not for everyone. Yes, if we're going to call it a privilege, it's a privilege that every person deserves. And what I think really is that as humanity, everyone has the right. And no one has less right or more right than I do or that my daughters or my sons have to an education. I do think everyone deserves access to the best education possible. Absolutely. As far as whose responsibility that is, it's really tricky. I do think first and foremost, it comes down to the home and the family more than anything else. I think it is the responsibility of parents to help educate their children. And I am grateful that we have schools and resources that are available to help parents. But I do think ultimately the responsibility lies with the parents or whoever is providing the care. I think it's interesting the different roles of government. The federal government, there's funding and there's overall, this is what we want taught. We're not going to change the laws of physics. Right. We're going to teach the laws of physics as they have been proven, right? Things like that. But I think when it comes to very specific curriculum, local is better. And it isn't local municipal government. It's local districts and charters and local curriculum choices, specific curriculum choices. I think local is far better than having it broadly mandated. So I've had the privilege this year of serving. Last legislative session, there was a committee that was formed to look at the curriculum in the state of Utah for civics education, specifically concerned about what is being taught and maybe what do we need to make sure is emphasized so that we are raising a generation of young people who can understand and appreciate the democracy that we have and being part of a democratic republic. And so there was this committee formed just to take a look at the civic education curriculum and just what the realities of it, what's being taught in the schools in Utah. You know, what is our civic education? What does it look like? And I've had the chance to serve on that committee. And it's been a great collection of people from across the educational spectrum in the state of Utah that have come together and then brought in subject experts and people with experience in all the different schools at different levels to try to help form an understanding for this committee to make some recommendations to the State Board of Education for changes that really might improve the civic education curriculum guidelines, if you will, in the state of Utah. But then those can be implemented at the local level, however they see fit best for their students, right?
So you think it's the government's responsibility to ensure that everybody has access to the education, that they can get it in some way, shape, or form, but it's the individuals or the locals' responsibility to act and then seek out that education and apply it to themselves?
That's probably a good way to put it.
Going back to what we said earlier, each person's education is different. If it were decided, the individual curriculum, et cetera, on a big scale, that would just make everything the same. Exactly. And so that just reinforces that it needs to be the home, it needs to be the family, it needs to be the smaller communities that are deciding the specifics of the education so that it can really be the most effective and the most personal.
Right. If I even think about the specific aims and goals of this school specifically, right, Paradigm, versus another charter school that's over here in the city and another charter school that's over here in the city, they are different. The specific core aims and purposes for which the curriculum is based around. They're different. They're all awesome, but they're different. And that's the emphasis that families and scholars and mentors here have chosen for them. That's why I really do think that local choices is important and that we do have a way for people to be able to choose.
I love that. So how do you use your platform to advocate for education in your community?
Well, uniquely, simply because that's my background. And, you know, I have a friend who she's teased me a few times and said, you're the only person I know who's ever gone from being a PTA president straight to being a mayor. Like that is a jump. She's like, it's awesome, but it's not something a lot of people do, you know, but since education has always been my passion and what I love and what I want to support and advocate for, I think that advocating and supporting families and helping ensure that policies align to give families tools and support to be able to raise strong families, healthy families, you know. So I think because I come to this role with that specific background, I'm a little more education engaged than perhaps some of my colleagues in this role, you know, maybe in other places or whatever, simply because it's my background and what I love. So what I do is kind of the things that I've mentioned, try to be a part of as many things as possible and take every opportunity and go offer to do assemblies or whatever. And I always, as soon as I am aware of things that are happening, I try to put it out there to highlight the great things happening on my social media, on my mayor's social media, and to kind of highlight, and this might sound silly, but even when we had our first snow day this year, I went searching for every single school in the city. And we have a lot of schools in this city to find what their plan was for that day, and took all of them and combined them all in a post to try to put out there, just to be an advocate for schools and a voice for all of our schools. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so increasing communication and discord about the education in the community is what you've been saying. And I think that leads into a book that you sent to us, Love Your Enemy.
Yes, Love Your Enemies by Arthur Brooks. Yeah, let me put in a plug. If you have the opportunity to read Love Your Enemies by Arthur Brooks, it is something that I wish everyone in America would read. He's really set out on a mission. I had the chance to actually meet him and visit with him in person over this last April.
Nice. That's cool.
He came and was the keynote speaker at our Utah League of Cities and Towns conference, and I got to visit with him. But he's really on a mission. He works back in Washington, D.C., and he teaches at Harvard, and he spends a lot of time in D.C., and he works with leadership in both parties, and he has for a very long time. His mission is to try to help Americans understand that we can heal the culture of contempt in America, and that we simply must. And I think education is really at the heart of that. And I think if we want the best outcomes in education, we need to learn how to heal the culture of contempt, which comes down to learning to have difficult conversations and be open to surrounding ourselves with people that see things different or think differently than we do, and to not see different as bad or wrong or evil or trying to destroy your community or trying to destroy our country. Do you know what I mean? He focuses on it's okay to disagree. We just need to learn how to disagree better. And I just totally agree with that. And I just think education is at the heart of so much of that.
How do the principles of that book help you in your attempts to bridge the gaps of the discourse in education?
Well, by first of all being absolutely open to inviting every different perspective to the table. Education should never be a conversation about public district schools versus charter schools or versus private schools. That's not right. That's not what this is. And surely there are some people out there who might see it that way. That is not what education should be. Education should be about how we can best educate our young people. And it just comes down to whether we're talking about education or anything else, having different perspectives at the table and being willing to have this dialogue and come up with the best solutions. In our city council meetings, before I open public comment, every time I ask that we maintain decorum and respect in the chamber. And I don't just ask that of the audience who's there to speak, but of every one of us, the staff and the elected officials and everyone who's there, keeping in mind that we're all there because we care about the city of South Jordan. And we're going to all see things different, and we're going to have different ideas about what should and shouldn't happen. But if we can maintain respect and come together and have our discussion, we can get there. Last night we had one specific thing, and it was 2 hours until we finally got to that point. But the residents and the developer and the council and the staff and the planning department and everyone, we finally came together. There was a little bit of compromise on everything, but we came together and it was respectful. And it's the same with education. I think it's that way everywhere. But I think there's a lot of opportunity in education to make sure that we are teaching the skills of how to have a respectful dialogue. And, contempt is being modeled in the media especially. And I think for young people in some of their homes, that contempt is being modeled. And I think we have the opportunity, we have the responsibility, I think, but I think the opportunity lies with education to help try to teach some of those.
Yeah,
that's cool.
One of my personal mantras that I've had for a really long time is that 2 of the most important things in anything that you do is communication and respect. It's important to let people know what you're thinking and what you're feeling and what your ideas are, but it's important to do so in a respectful manner that is okay with them and that is okay with you and not necessarily a heated discussion or anything. And so putting that into what you're saying, it's engaging in the great conversation of ideas, which is what this podcast is about, being able to see people as people and have a conversation that is worth having, talking about deep topics because it's a good thing to do, because it's enriching, because it's enlightening. Another thing that your comment made me think of is Anatomy of Peace. Seeing people as people. It's not a heart of war. It's not that I'm coming into this room and saying, this is the best idea, I am right, I'm the only person that is right, and you're bad and evil because you think other than me. It's not that. It's that you walk into a room saying, I have an idea that I think is right. I'm going to come, I'm going to compromise, I'm going to listen, I'm going to share my idea because I want what's best for this community. But I'm going to be doing so in a respectful manner that is willing to change and willing to be flexible.
Yeah, Stringfellow Barr has a paper called Notes on Dialogue, And there's a portion in
That's
that
beautiful.
where he is basically saying if you disagree with the people that you're having a discussion with and then you agree to disagree, it'd be better to resolve conflict. He's basically stating that it's better to talk through things until you can find common ground to agree on than it is to agree to disagree, because you both are worth having a conversation with. And if there's any conflict whatsoever, then that's demeaning towards the other person, which is really cool to see.
It's beautiful to see the compromise, to see the flexibility.
That's what it is.
To see two people with different ideas coming together, having a discussion, and coming out on the same page.
And it's unbelievable how rare that's becoming.
Right.
And it's more important than ever that we learn that and that we teach it and that we model it.
Yeah.
I think we need that. Again, if I can just touch on one thing really quick, when you mentioned sitting down and having a dialogue and talking,
right?
You use those words speaking. That right there, I think, is important, because I don't think the place that these dialogues should be taking place is on social media.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think that we're going to have productive, healthy dialogues, even bringing difference of opinion. Mostly it's a difference of opinion on social media, without the intent of reaching, some kind of a mutual understanding. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said sitting down and having a dialogue and discussing this using face-to-face conversation. It's almost a dying art for people to even know how to do that. And it's important that that happens. And I think that's obviously something that I feel strongly should be modeled in homes, but it isn't modeled in every home. And it's an opportunity that we have, I think, in education and in government and in any setting that we might be in to try to help show others the way to do that.
And especially with social media, it's like an echo chamber, and you don't get directly what the person is actually meaning. And so you can interpret it in so many different ways. Like here at Paradigm, we have discussions about books, and especially the great books and very philosophical things. And so when we're having a discussion, there's like, we can read one sentence and like 4 people could have a completely different opinion about what that one sentence said. And that's why it's so important to actually sit down and have a discussion so that you guys can all come to a common ground of what that sentence meant and how to apply that to your life too.
Right.
So
yes. Agreed. Social media, there's a great culture of contempt on social media.
Right.
Of course, not everyone, but it is loud.
Oh,
and,
for sure.
And enough to, I think, make people think that that's all that exists. That's what the world is now. That's what the country is now. Everybody just hates each other and bashes, and, we're not getting it. That it's not true. It isn't true. It's loud on social media, but that's why it's important to have these conversations in person and to step away. And I think part of what we can teach and model too here in education and also in government is how to do that, how to have self-control, how to step away from it, how to not choose to engage in unproductive dialogue on social media, and how to do it better.
It's quite interesting because you're saying that social media is loud, and it's true. There's so much on there, there's so much going on. It almost takes the human out of it, and it puts up a barrier between you and the other person on the other side. They can say something, you can type it out and text it from your computer at home, and nothing's going to happen to you. It's almost safe, and it makes people do things that otherwise they would get consequences for. You wouldn't just say something like that in person. And so it's so interesting to me that you would say that.
There's certainly the perceived safety of anonymity behind a keyboard, where not only would there be consequences more in person, but I also think that our better natures as people tend to keep us from saying certain things in person that we might think, but we wouldn't say to someone in person, that people don't even hesitate to type out on social media.
Do you know what the Socratic discussion is?
It's something I've heard of and know just a little bit about, but it's not something I've ever studied in depth.
Right. So, basically, it's just the way Socrates, there's a story about Socrates and a guy named Thrasymachus. I think they're in the Olympics or something like that. And Thrasymachus is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to win. I'm the best. High ego, all this stuff. And Socrates would just really put him to the question, just questioning like, okay, why are you the best? Or what have you done to be the best? And stuff like that. Basically, the Socratic discussion is not just about sharing your opinion. It's also about opening up and being open to other opinions and asking questions about their opinions. It's inquiry. They could totally be the best, and if they are, then it'll show itself. But if you're just asking them questions, it also shows them what they can do to be a better person, which I think is really cool.
One of my favorite things that one of my mentors has said to me is be curious, not judgmental. So if someone comes to you with either a question or a statement, instead of saying, no, you're wrong, saying, well, where did you hear that? What gave you this opinion? What are you thinking about? What are your points? What supports that? And seeking to understand their side. I think that's so interesting in so many discussions and so many opinions today. People don't research the other side. Half the time they don't research their own side. Right. Fact checking is important, but it's so important to not only understand your side, but to understand the side that is opposing.
I love that. And to be willing to seek to understand. I think
Right.
that's also where, you mentioned the social media is really an echo chamber.
Right.
It is so important that we be open to having relationships and surrounding ourselves and being comfortable
Right.
having other people in our circle of our lives that we interact with that do think differently than
Yeah.
we do,
Right.
that do have different opinions or different political affiliations or different whatever,
Right.
I think that's important. And that's also something that we need more of.
Definitely.
We need more of that.
Well, and that's interesting because social media, it's really hard to ask a genuine question, and even to respond to that, because a lot of social media it limits you on how much you can actually type and stuff like that and how much you can post.
Right.
But it just sucks to type things out, and people don't want to do that. And then you don't get the reflections of someone's voice. So you just can't understand what they're meaning, where they're coming from. And you just can't ask a genuine question over social media like you can in person.
Well, don't they say that 90% of communication is body language?
Right.
It's not the spoken word, right? It's not the words you use.
No.
It's how you say it and it's how you look. And there's so much more to communication. And that is lost on social media. All we get are the words.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is why, as you said, there can be 4 different interpretations of one sentence in the text that you're reading in your
Right,
class. But at least together you can have a dialogue. When you read
Right.
something on social media, there's going to be all of those
Right.
different interpretations, but you don't get the rest of what was intended
No.
behind it, the rest of the communication. That's lost. I'm not saying social media is terrible and stay away from social media, even though sometimes I think it is. But I also think there's a lot of good that can come from
Right.
social
Yeah,
media.
for sure.
And
Right.
participating healthy on social media. In fact, I
Exactly.
think there's a chance to really share a lot of good and spread good. We just have to choose to do so.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. Yeah.
Right. And I think part of it also is that, to bring it back to our topic of this discussion, is you need to be educated. If you're going on social media with an uneducated view and you're just all of this information, I'm going to take it in. One of my favorite things my dad used to say to me is everything on social media is correct, especially if it disagrees with itself. And of course, as the most sarcastic comment, right? But I kept that with me because I was like, there are so many different opinions on social media. So you need to come to that with an educated view, which means that the families and the small communities need to be teaching everybody, young and old, what is right, what is good, what is truth, so that then they can go and participate in social media in a good, healthy, truthful way.
I love that. That takes us right back to where we started for me. What do we need in South Jordan? Why
Right.
do we need, what is education? What's our need here in South Jordan? And I said a well-educated citizenry. That's why
Right.
so many people are now getting all of their news from social media, 100% of their news from social media. And we need people who are educated and really understand how to vet that and how to look at other sources.
Exactly.
Right.
I know that for me, during the pandemic and everything, and especially the vaccine, I would come to school and I would have my friends share their opinions with me, and they would all be very different, but they would all be very passionate. A lot of the time I could see by the way that they spoke about it and by their sources, and even asking a couple of them, they just went home, their parents had said something that they may or may not have fact checked, and then the child comes to school and
Ready to defend
passionately,
it.
right, which is to a point a good thing because it's good to be passionate, but it's interesting to see that versus some of my other friends that their parents say, we have our opinions, but we want you to have your own opinion, go out, ask about it, look at different things, and the opinions varied so much between the two groups, and many more groups, honestly. And that just shows that in anything that you're doing, in any opinions that you have, it's so important to do your own research, to be looking at numbers, to be looking at multiple sites. I know in science classes, we've done bias projects, and we have to look at multiple different articles, even if they are credible articles, because so many people have that bias.
Right. So good. I could not agree with you more. But that's exactly what we did actually with our kids with the vaccine. One son who's a senior in high school right now, and he was really all over doing his own homework, and he made his determination quickly.
Right. Yeah.
And then my daughter took a little bit more time, and then she made her decision,
Right.
but not quite as quick as her brother did. But we wanted the same thing. This is how we feel.
Right.
This is what we think. But we want you to
Right.
become educated about what this is.
Right.
Looking at,
That's
It's
actually
so
really
good.
interesting because we were talking about how education needs to be in the home. And sometimes I feel like my brain wants to think that looks like a lecture, parents coming in and saying, this is a thing. But what it really would be, if we're using that example, is parents, mentors, and whatever guidance you have in your education need to come in and say, here's what we have found. Here's the history. Here is the lessons that we know. Here's what we know is truth. go out and find it for yourself.
Right.
And
vet it yourself.
Exactly.
Yep. Do
exactly.
you see it that way as well?
Right.
Do you? Mm-hmm.
I love education.
I think it's interesting. Like my parents, they tell me what they think, but they don't tell me what to think. So,
Right.
And I mean, I think that's similar to what you're saying you do with your kids. And so
Yep.
I had to go through a similar process of really figuring out what I believed in, what I wanted. And I mean, me and Kellen talked to a lot of similar people and they'd be so passionate. And I'm like, oh, maybe that is the right thing, And then I talk to somebody else and they have a completely different opinion. I'm like, oh, maybe that's the right thing. And I just wasn't sure for myself yet. And so I was just kind of agreeing with everybody. And then it came to a point where I realized I couldn't agree with everyone because, it was just so different. And so I really had to go and I had to research for myself what I thought was right and what I should do for myself. So, yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. I think that's how it should be for all of us. I think with politics, learning really what we, how we feel about social issues and our understanding of the history of America and what the Constitution says, what it means and what it doesn't mean.
Right.
What rights and privileges it affords and what it doesn't.
Right.
There's a lot of different interpretations, but I think being able to make decisions for ourselves and decide this political affiliation or not, seems to fit more of how I feel.
Right.
And it's okay if that changes. One example of that is Ronald Reagan. He voted as a Democrat for decades.
Right.
And then over the course of time, I just read his biography twice, actually. I loved it so much. It was an autobiography. And you can actually listen to it, and it's fascinating. He ended up deciding for himself that actually the way I've been voting for a long time doesn't align with what I'd like to see happen. This is more in line. And I'm not saying one party's better than the other or to do this or that. I'm just saying he was an example of someone who, over the course of time, as he learned more and vetted more and understood more, he just had gone along with what kind of how he was raised and people that he liked and thought they were doing a good job. But over the course of time, he came to understand that he felt actually differently.
Right.
And so he had the courage to change and say, I'm actually affiliated differently. And I think that's the direction I lean more. And then he jumped all in with both feet and, ran with that party.
Right. Being okay with being flexible and being okay looking at both sides. I know that personally, I think that there are pros and cons. I think there are parts of some sides that I like, parts of some sides that I don't like. And I think it's really interesting to have both pieces. I would love to talk about the Constitution for a second. In the second article, I believe, talking about executive powers, originally for vice presidents, it would be somebody of the other party because they count all the votes. You've got the president and then you've got the vice president. And then in the 12th Amendment, they changed that.
Right.
So to have at the beginning of America, it would have been harder. It was different, to have in power both sides, or at least two sides. And it definitely is an interesting dynamic to deal with. But I think that there's a lot of power and a lot of beauty in having that representation. Because a lot of the time when we're voting for presidents or any office, really, there are some people who want one side and some people who want the other side for specific reasons. So to have both ideas in power and in a place where they can do something about it, I think is very valuable. Do you think that them changing that was right? Do you think that was wrong? And maybe it was right for the time, but how does that affect our government now? Because I feel like a lot of the time now it's just because they're so similar and because, vice president and president together, and then they just end up bashing on the other party.
Right.
That's just how it happens.
Really has changed, hasn't it?
Right.
I mean, it really is. I don't think we'll ever see it go back to what it was.
Right.
I just think in practice, exactly what you said, we've gotten so far past that. It's almost frustrating sometimes. Sometimes it's a little disappointing to see that any new administration that comes in tends to undo, because of political reasons or party affiliation, good things that the previous administration did that might really have actually been good for America. They're not all. Neither party is ever going to get it all right. However, I'd actually be really interested to see an experiment in that because it makes me think of something more closer to home, but they're in a different role. One is executive and one is legislative. The Salt Lake County Council, we have a Democrat mayor for Salt Lake County, and we have a Republican majority council. We have Democrats on the county council, but we have a Republican majority council. And so they work together, but we also have the executive branch and then the legislative branch. So they have different roles, and I don't think that's a true experiment in it because simply the roles are a little bit different. I'd be fascinated to see an experiment in today's world. Having, one party as president and the other party as vice president have to work together. There are some places that do that with their governor. I think there are still some states that do that with their governor and lieutenant governor, which I think is interesting.
I agree.
And probably something I should look at a little closer. You've actually sparked a lot of thoughts in me that I'm like, I would like to learn a little bit more about, because there's no doubt that in today's world, that reality is hard.
Oh,
Right.
Probably challenging, but how good would it be if we could learn to
right.
work together in that way? That's one thing I really love about this local government role. In the state of Utah, local municipal government is nonpartisan. So we don't run on a party platform. And we each can belong to whatever party we want, whatever. But this elected role that I'm in is a nonpartisan role. And I love that. I love that because I think people don't want political affiliation to impact whether or not their road gets done or built or plowed, or, that they have their water, that their municipal services are met, that they have police and fire. They don't want that to be partisan. They just want to know that their needs that local government is responsible for are being met. Right. And I love that about local government.
Exactly. It's not that, it's a specific party or a specific person doing these specific things. And it is to a point, but not in that party way. It's that they are representing the people and they are a servant leader in a position to, like you said earlier, and I can't remember the exact words, what you said was better, but to be a servant leader and you are there to help us and to represent us and to get things done, but to get things done, not specifically for any reasons or values or morale.
Right. I tend to think that in this local municipal role, people trust a little bit more that it's okay that I do work with legislators and our elected Congress and our legislators and county council and everybody else, regardless of their political affiliation, because if their decisions have any impact on what happens in South Jordan, I work with them and I don't care what party they belong to, and I create good relationships with them and we work together. And I think that works really well at this level. It should work well at every level.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that simply by even having to run for an office in just a strictly partisan, situation takes a whole majority of people who no longer would even trust any of what you have to say or think. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't know. And I do think maybe with some people, it also changes how they would even go about it, right? Because of the political affiliation. And so it's fascinating.
This reminds me a lot of the Federalist paper. Is it 31 that talks about different factions, basically, and how you have a majority and a minority. And oftentimes the minority is really overlooked because the majority is constantly winning. Sometimes that can take away the actual say from the people, if that makes any sense, because there's no opposition. If you're always having one majority always winning, if you don't have the minority actually able to do anything, then do the people actually have power to say things, if that makes sense?
Right. And not only that, going to Federalist Paper number 10 as well, which talks about factions and them in relation to liberty, there's a quote that is, "There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty, which is essential to its existence. The other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests." So we have to have the difference because otherwise we don't have the liberty. Right. That is what this country is about. We want freedom. We want freedom of speech. We want freedom of religion. We want to be able to do what we love and to have passions and interests and different ideas. The point, however, is not to do it in an angry manner. It's not trying to beat up on other people. I mean, in the Constitution, peaceable assembly. We have the right to peaceably assemble, but it is important to have differences. It is important to have individuality. And that was what the founding fathers saw when we were creating this nation.
Right.
I love that you said that. And it's what I love about our government and the democratic republic that we live in. And I think there's a lot of people who might tend to think that it's harder now than it's ever been. And our country is more divided than we've ever been. It's always been hard. It was meant to be hard. It started out hard. Those were very different thinkers, the founding fathers and those who were part of organizing and establishing our nation here in our government. They thought very differently, but it's meant to be different exactly for the reasons that you said.
Right.
We're so lucky and so blessed to get to live here where we do get to think for ourselves, where we're not being sold propaganda with no choice but to be told how to think and what we have to believe. And it's been that way in a lot of nations around the world for all time. And we're so fortunate to not have that. And if I can just bring it around really quick and just let you know, whether it's education, whether it's what's happening in government, whether it's social issues, whether it's any of the things that you're seeing, what's happening, what you hear in the news, what you read on social media, all these things that we've talked about, quality of education, choice in education, all these different things. Right. Sometimes it can get heavy and get people down. It can weigh you down and make you think there's no hope or we're not going to be as awesome as America has been, right? That is simply not true. And my final thought would really be to emphasize that is not true. This narrative out there that you can't trust your neighbor or you can't trust anyone who you elect to represent you or that our best days are behind us is not true. There's a loud narrative that's false. It's a false narrative because I know people across the city. I know people in every one of our schools. I know people across this state. We're not broken. And I truly, sincerely believe our best years are still ahead of us. We have good people who care about their neighbors. They care about their families. They care about their children. They want to help. They want to make a difference and serve in their community. They want to be part of helping with education. It matters. They want to take care of people. They go into medicine. They go into education. They go into things because they want to take care of people. We have public safety who work so hard. We have people at every different level. It doesn't matter what you do for a living. We've got people who want to help people. Good people are at the heart of what this community is, at what this school is, and this is who we are.
That is so awesome. As a takeaway to this conversation, that's amazing. One thing that we do to kind of wrap things up a little bit is we also ask for a challenge from our guests to challenge our listeners. What do you think, taking from our discussion, you could challenge our listeners with?
My challenge would be to try to read that book by Arthur Brooks, Love Your Enemies, and be willing to explore. But really, in action, a takeaway, be willing to sit down and consider that anyone who thinks differently than you might actually have some valid points, that they aren't wrong simply because they think differently, that they aren't bad because they think differently, that they're not evil, could actually be value in a different opinion. It doesn't mean you have to agree with the different opinion.
Right.
But there could be some value to it. Be open to that and to stay away from being a keyboard warrior. If you've got concerns, talk to someone in person and don't be a keyboard warrior. Don't engage in argument over social media. That would be my challenge.
Amen.
That's beautiful.
Love that.
And I love that you brought it back to the individual. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast. I know that I enjoyed it. I know that I learned ton today. And thank you to our listeners for joining. We hope that you learned a lot today as well. We are so happy to have you and hope that we can see you again soon. And so welcome to season 3. That was a wonderful episode.
Alrighty. And if you could rate us on iTunes, that would be so helpful. Spotify, for all of our Spotify users, we have a question and answer for any episodes you'd like to hear from us in the future. If you could please fill that out, that would be great for us to come up with new content for you guys.
Don't forget to engage in the great conversation of ideas.